Hi, folks. Welcome to our Ask the Experts panel at Microsoft Build. We're super excited to be here today. And as LaunchDarkly, we're here to answer any questions that you have about feature management, how we do deployments and rollouts, how we do experimentation, and all the other amazing things that you can do with feature flags. My name is Heidi Waterhouse. I am the Principal Transformation Advocate here at LaunchDarkly, and I'm here with Tom Totenberg and Mike Zorn. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would love to. Thank you, Heidi, and hi, everybody. I am a solutions engineer here with LaunchDarkly, which really means I help get to be the bridge between the technology that we provide and the problems that people are trying to solve. So whatever questions that people tend to have about, hey, how does LaunchDarkly work? What does it look like? Can I do X, Y, or Z with it? I'm one of the people who actually helps with that. I also like to knock my microphone away because I tend to gesture with my arms too much. And Mike, I will send it over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm Mike Zorn. I'm a software architect here at LaunchDarkly. I've been here for about 4 years working on the innards of LaunchDarkly. And prior to that, I was actually a LaunchDarkly customer. So I've been using LaunchDarkly for feature management for many years and have a lot of experience with it.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for those introductions. We put together a few questions while everybody is sitting down with their coffee for this afternoon session, at least on the West Coast, or maybe their evening drink, or maybe their morning drink. We hope that these will be useful to you, but we really, really want to answer your questions. So I'm in the chat, and if you have any questions, we will be happy to answer them. But let's start with, this session is called Continuous Cloud Modernization with Feature Flags. And I think we should maybe back up a little bit and ask ourselves, what do we mean by cloud modernization? If you had to describe it, Mike, what would you say?
I think that Tom might be a better person to answer this, but I can give a shot at it. I would say it's something where you are, you're working in the cloud, and you have to, as your provider is making, their own improvements, like a new, instance type, a new managed service, this type of thing. Sort of the way you would want to design your technology is going to be changing out from under you while you're building things. So you kind of end up in this continuous process of needing to rebuild and re-architect as you go to continue to have like a innovative piece of technology that you operate.
Awesome. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also want to call out that we did get our first Q&A question in there that I think we can go to as soon as I'm done here. Cloud modernization for me goes into a couple parts. One of those is, of course, physically moving your application code from somewhere that you are managing on premise to some other person's computer, right? We've got AWS, GCP, we've got Azure, of course. So with all of those, those actually unlock some options for us in terms of how we actually architect our applications, right? It's easier to spin up microservices. We can start to use edge compute. And so if we are able to then leverage these cloud platforms in order to do that, that helps inform the way that we actually structure our application and make it a little more predictable with the inputs and outputs and how we structure that and how the various different pieces talk to each other. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. And with moving parts, a lot of things can break. And that's where we fit in, is to help make sure that they don't break.
Yep. And I'm going to back even further back than that before we answer this question in Q&A and say cloud modernization is what you sell to executives when you realize that you have to come out of the data center, at least partially. It's this transformational moment where you realize that the way your workloads go, the way your deployment goes, the way your releases goes, they all change when you don't have the power to control the electricity going to your computers anymore. And I think that there are people at all levels of what we call cloud modernization, And it's important to remember that lots of people really are just starting on their cloud journey, and lots of people have been there for quite a while. And it's important to remember that we are all on this journey together. So our first question that we got from Anonymous is, what advice would you have for someone who deploys to clients on-prem on-prem and cloud?
I can start with
go
that
ahead.
one if you like. But please feel free to augment whatever I say, which is that so with feature flags, which is the context under which we're speaking, right? Feature management of having these remote points of control in your applications, as long as these clients that you're deploying to that are on-prem or cloud, as long as they're able to connect via the internet with something like LaunchDarkly, then you still are able to retain those points of control. So it doesn't really matter where the application actually sits, as long as it is able to have that public internet communication. But the challenge there is that in cloud, of course, you tend to retain more of a consistent version of your application, whereas on-prem, maybe some of your customers don't want to update, and that gets to be really difficult to manage if we're trying to keep everybody moving forward and keep the keep the wheels rolling in terms of delivering the new features to those customers. And if you've got those resistant on-prem customers, then how can we use feature flags to make sure that we're still managing that experience if not everybody is on the same version? So it gets a little tricky, but there's a lot of neat targeting that you can do to say, hey, if you are on this version, we are going to start rolling out this version or above, we will start rolling out this feature, right? And that might apply to your forward-thinking on-prem customers as well as all of your cloud customers, but that's a really easy way to be able to manage that as long as you're able to have that consistent targeting rule there. Anything to add to that, Mike and Heidi?
I would say that there's a really cool pattern that I've seen people use that we call an Albatross Flag. Sometimes you have customers who can't update for some good reason. Like there is a legitimate business reason they have to stay on Java 7 and they can't leave it, and you can't argue about it. So what we do is we don't tell most of our customers that we support that. We partition the targeting off so that only that customer gets that older version and everybody else is pulled along to the newer versions as they go. Using that kind of targeting based on like semantic labeling or whatever is useful really gives organizations a lot of chance to make sure that they're delivering what they want to be delivering. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think that one additional thing, I think you covered almost all the bases. One additional thing to be aware of is that if you're deploying something to a client's environment, you're ceding a lot of control. Like you can't like change the server config file or something like this. But if you're using like a feature management solution, you can that is like a control plane have for your application. So you can roll out a new feature with it, but you also could do things like like turn on like an extra debugging feature or something like this if someone's having an issue. So that's another avenue that you could use feature management in such an environment.
So I have an auxiliary question that I've been thinking about this. Lots of time people come to us and they say, can I do this even though it's on-prem or even though it's heavily firewalled? And like Tom said, if there's an internet connection, yes, but I feel like it also applies to like Internet of Things, where we don't have that sort of reliable constant link to the lights that operate my backdrop. Do you think there's an interesting use case for feature flags in partial connectivity circumstances? Mike?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, and I mean in a partial connectivity, the idea is that you have like an inconsistent connection to your server with the feature flags. But the nice thing about feature flags is like the way that they're delivered is that we ship rules to the client. So even though their internet connection may be inconsistent, feature flag evaluation is still consistent because the rules are shipped to them. So you should be able to use it kind of just as you would in any other environment, in spite of kind of like the possible flakiness of the connection.
It's a feature. So, so Charlie asks, once a feature has been deployed to production, is it supposed to take out the feature flag or make it permanent? I have a lot of opinions on this, so I'm going to go first this time. There are two kinds of feature flags. There are temporary flags, which are in fact meant to be removed, or else you will end up with a nightmarish tangle of code. Those are things that are like experiments, deployments, and other things that you're just going to do for a little while and then pull back out. But there are also a lot of what we call long-lived or permanent feature flags that are load-bearing, that are part of your architecture. That's things like entitlements or kill switches and circuit breakers for your ops people, things that you actually want to have controllable in real time all the time, and you don't want to remove it. Do you have any other insights on that, Tom?
Yeah, one of them is just thinking about the people side of things, right? You a lot of the time will have epics and tickets and stories and everything here about how we are managing the life cycle of these features. And I recently saw a customer of ours, Ben, he's a good friend of LaunchDarkly's, and he said the epic ain't done until the feature flag is removed. And so really there's this process element to it, which is making sure that we are keeping track of where we implement the flags, making sure that we're retiring the flags from LaunchDarkly itself and keeping track of that, and removing the flag from the code and making sure that those are in line. We've got ways of handling that, and that should be a part of ongoing hygiene. But sometimes we also recommend having things like flag days and incentivizing, saying, okay, are there any old, less used flags where we're seeing now consistent delivery, 100% of our audience is getting the same variation? Let's remove that, right? And so making sure that you've got that process surrounding the flags and working in conjunction with that. If it just becomes part of the DNA of your overall delivery, then it tends to be pretty smooth and you get all the light switch benefits of having those control points without adding a lot of additional overhead, right? That's the whole argument.
So Mike, I know that LaunchDarkly just did recently a flag day where we went through and removed a bunch of stuff. Were you on any of those teams?
Oh yeah. I found a few flags that I had created, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago or something that I had forgotten about. So every quarter we do like an exercise internally to kind of, take a day to look at all of the old flags you've made and make sure that they actually should still continue to exist, because they can sometimes pile up. So yeah, in the most recent one, I found a few that I had forgotten about.
So overall, how many feature flags would you say that LaunchDarkly has running LaunchDarkly, like roughly?
Oh, I know exactly, actually, because I looked at it yesterday for some reason. It's 646.
There you go. I think that's a useful number to put out so that people sort of understand what we think is a reasonable scope.
Yeah.
So we got another question from Jeff. As a longtime on-prem systems engineer switching to cloud engineer, how can feature flag style models help with infrastructure as code deployment from the cloud infrastructure perspective? That's a gnarly one. Who wants it?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first swing at it. As a person who has never been a systems engineer, switching to cloud engineer, so looking at a bit from the outside perspective, I always come back to, does this make your life easier? Does it make your day-to-day safer? And that's like fundamentally, when we peel back all the fancy tech, that is what we're all about, right? Are you able to roll back changes instantly without making big hardware changes? Are you able to just test things in your production environment by targeting only yourself? All of these sorts of extra safety nets there. And that really helps a lot with the infrastructure as code deployments, because if we need to have like versioned and predictable and controlled configurations, we like to play nicely with our neighbors. We've got a Terraform integration where we can set up flag configurations in this file that is then versioned and standardized and controlled. And so that way, that's, again, just an extra layer of psychological safety to it, which means, yes, we've tested this out. We've tested this out in our lower level environments. Now we're ready to turn it on in production. let's make sure that this is happening in some sort of consistent way that is versioned and part of our overall core, software delivery pipeline or infrastructure delivery pipeline. And that way it's happening right alongside all of the other activities you're doing, and you don't have to do all this context switching and go into our UI. If you're more comfortable saying, hey, we've got all this other configuration happening already in these, Terraform files, for instance, then great. Manage your LaunchDarkly configuration there too. I think I didn't directly answer that question, but my overall thoughts are, yeah, let's use the flags there too for infrastructure, not just for feature deployments, because then instead of saying, hey, there's a person in our new instance that isn't leaving and we know that it's broken there and we don't want to kick them out, when do we kick them out? We just turn the flag off and it's fine. Anybody new who's coming in there is now going to get a stable experience because we controlled that instantly with the flag, and we don't have to wait for things like traffic routing. It just helps a lot.
That makes sense. Anything to add, Mike?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about how we do this internally. Since we do use infrastructure as code pretty heavily, and we are entirely in the cloud. So we have a couple. We use our own Terraform provider to make new projects that correspond to new infrastructure or new projects in LaunchDarkly. So you can have a new have a partitioned area of LaunchDarkly for whatever new service or something you're spinning up. But typically we are, deploying our infrastructure and then layering flags kind of on top of it. So, you're deploying the new infrastructure and then no traffic is going to it. And then you can turn on, the new feature that goes to the new infrastructure for a test account or something. And that's how you can kind of verify that your infrastructure has been set up correctly. And then you can, do a rollout from there onto new infrastructure.
That makes sense. I think it's interesting to see how many ways there are to think about feature flags and how they intersect with and are not quite the same as variables, which I think a lot of us sort of started our IAC Terraform career with. And feature flags are not variables, but they have some sort of emotional resonance. So Chris asked, what has been the best enabler for modernizing apps that you've worked on? For example, CI/CD processes, alpha beta testing programs. What is the thing that people win fastest with if they're doing this modernizing app or going to the cloud? Tom, you talk to a lot of people who are sort of starting their journey.
I do. Boy, and so the tricky part about this question and trying to answer it is that everybody has slightly different processes, and there's a lot of interconnected parts, which LaunchDarkly, as feature management, is only part of that overall process. So my answer, admittedly, tends to be biased there, right? But whenever I think about modernization of the processes and pipelines that you're doing, I keep coming back to so I used to work closer into version control, and I keep thinking about the image. I don't know if you've ever seen it, which says this is a standard Git flow, and it's a picture of the London subway map, right? And it's just arcane and terrible and really confusing. And so my whole thought, because I'm very visual again with the hand waving, is the closer that we can get to reducing the complexity of those different versions and branches, the smoother and more automated that we can be the smaller and more incremental changes that we can do there, the better, because it just means less context switching for all of the engineers. Nobody wants to have to parse through tens of thousands of lines of code and seeing where the merge conflict is happening and finding unintended breaks. If we can instead narrow that down to smaller incremental changes, it's a lot easier for our tiny human brains to actually wrap our heads around it. And we fit in with that whole model, right? Although we do not directly touch your version control and Git flow and everything, using feature management tends to have ripple effects backwards into that process. Because if we think about CI/CD being able to essentially deploy code on demand, I don't know how you do that unless you can hide half-baked functionality. And that is exactly what LaunchDarkly does, right? So you can deploy code, keep it hidden and unused, turn it on whenever you want it. And that means that, okay, it's safe for us to deploy this little incremental change that we can actually parse. We don't have to wait until everything is thoroughly tested in lower level environments that try to replicate production but probably fail. And we can instead just keep deploying continuously. And that works very nicely with the other initiatives that you have going on in terms of that branching strategy, in terms of testing automation, all of that. We're now just breaking it down into smaller chunks and hiding those chunks until they're ready to be seen. That's my probably oversimplified mental model anyway.
One of the things that I often say is it's not continuous delivery or it's not continuous deployment if you can't ship broken code. Like, you don't need to show it to people. I'm not saying we should just YOLO things out to the public. That is not where we're coming from. But if it's going to be continuous, there has to be a state where it is half-baked, where it is unready. I think for me, the answer is partially encapsulated in Tom's answer. If you haven't read Accelerate yet, go ahead and get your copy and join the revolution. Because what Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jez Humble are saying is the faster you release, the safer your releases are. And the only way you can really do that is to make them smaller and make them lower stakes and make them less dangerous. And as people have made, moving from 6 months to 4 months for a release cycle, we start to see all of the other benefits of this modernization movement come along. Like, you can't do that if you don't have a good build structure. You can't do that if you don't have some end testing. You can't do that if you don't have a good pipeline. And so putting build speed or release speed as your metric that you're measuring on pulls a bunch of other things in a good direction. How about you, Mike?
So I think I'm a little biased here, but I think that to directly answer the question, I think the best enabler is probably feature flags themselves. And the reason for that is that any kind of like large initiative is going to have a bunch of risks, and like things are probably going to go wrong at some point. But the thing that feature flags give you is like this ability to very quickly revert something. You don't have to wait for a hotfix. You don't have to wait for deployment. You can just like click the button in the UI and turn off the thing. So if something has gone wrong because like, your teams are getting used to their code automatically going live or something like this, like giving them the ability to kind of have like a quick out, it seems like it would be, the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak.
We're accepting all the bias. All right. we have a question in chat that I think all of us have gotten, and that is there a method for on-premise that does not require an internet connection, like remote or secure sites? And the answer to that for years was no, not really. We do have some contracts with like gov.cloud.gov. Yes. We do have some secured sites. We do have some security stuff, but if you are absolutely air gapped, this is not a solution that's going to make your life easier.
Yeah, I can provide some extra color on that too, which is, so tangibly, we have something called relay proxy in offline mode. And essentially what you do then is you load up a little JSON file, and that is your flag rules that your applications can ingest. But if that is your primary use case, like Heidi said, LaunchDarkly is probably not for you because you're missing out on one of the core value props, which is, hey, instant control, turn it on and off, instant targeting, getting real-time feedback for fast feedback loops. Great, that's the core value proposition. And if most of what you're doing is offline with zero connectivity to the internet, you're paying us money to be a fancy JSON parser, right? So on the other hand, though, if you've got 95% or 90% or whatever your acceptable threshold is of your use cases saying, yep, we're connected to the internet, we're able to do this on off, and you just need consistency between the rules that you are defining for the broader population and that remaining percentage that is in a more secure air-gapped network, then great, LaunchDarkly can define those rules. We're making sure that those are stable and set up well for those non-essential or non-critical secure environments. And then we still use that relay proxy with offline mode with the rules generated by LaunchDarkly. And that way, again, getting back to sort of the IAC the point here, it is consistent. Your targeting and rollout is consistent with what you're doing with the rest of your population, including for that air-gapped network portion. So I'm going to make an announcement, I guess, here, which is the documentation to that relay proxy offline mode. So I'll put that in the announcement section.
Excellent. Thank you. Someone asked, are you recommending that, for example, that a PR for a change is good granularity to create a flag? I think, Mike, you're the one who creates the most flags of us. So would you do it by PR?
It's kind of a tough one because, PRs can be of very different sizes. I think, so I'll tell you what, this isn't gonna, okay, I guess your PR, for example. Okay, yeah, so PR is hard to use because, it can be a bunch of different sizes, but I'll tell you what we generally do, which is like if we're embarking on like, building a new feature, kind of the first step is, or the first like code writing step is to like add the flag to the code base. So like if you're making a new feature, that is where you're going to create the flag. And building a new feature often takes like many PRs, at least for me, because I make a lot of mistakes. So I think probably my guess would be PR is probably too small a granularity. You probably want to encompass sort of like a, I don't know, logical work item that you're building, not like a single code change. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think of it as a unit of business value, which is something that not all developers get to have insight into, but from an organizational perspective, what you want to be flagging is like, is this thing or set of things a unique business value? So that might be dark mode, or it might be, a single checkbox. Dark mode is a lot more complicated than people think it is. That is the expensive example, not the cheap example. But a checkbox is a cheap example, and it's still providing value. So we have only 2 minutes left, and I am going to let Tom and then Mike leave you with any final thoughts.
Oh, just that. So I guess I'll go first, which is thank you for taking the time. I hope that this was valuable. And if you did, if this sparked some sort of idea for you, which is something that we tend to find with people with feature flags, they realize they have a new superpower and they say, oh my gosh, I want to use this for everything. Come talk to us. Like we're happy to have the conversations. I hope that this was helpful. But if you want to follow up more, then that's exactly what we're here for. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining the session. I hope you all learned something. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. You can reach me at mike@launchdarkly.com if you want to send me an email. But yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, folks. It's been great to be here, and we hope that we see you around the conference and around the world. Have a good evening, afternoon, or morning.